Hey everyone, this is Michael from Up and Running Tutorials, and in this video, we'll take our first look at React and how you use it to write HTML in a Gatsby project. So we've just created a new Gatsby project using the default starter, and we've opened it in VS Code and started up Gatsby's development server so we can see the project in the browser. If you're not sure how to get to this point, check out the link in the description below to an earlier video where I've walked you through how to start a new Gatsby project and get it up and running on your computer. This video assumes that you have some knowledge of HTML and some knowledge of JavaScript, but it's completely fine if you have never used React before. This video is going to walk you through the basics of writing HTML with React. So if this is your first Gatsby project and you're ready to start writing some HTML, you might start looking around your source folder for where the HTML files are so you can edit them. We look here, JavaScript, 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 images, there's nothing there, components, JavaScript, some CSS, some JavaScript. So there are no HTML files at all, except in the public folder here. Gatsby creates an index.html for you, but we learned in an earlier video not to edit anything in the public folder because it's going to get rewritten. So where do you write your HTML if there aren't any HTML files? Well, the short answer is that when you are creating a project in React, you write your HTML in JavaScript rather than in HTML files. So if you're used to writing your HTML inside of .html files, this is a big change, but React actually makes this transition pretty easy for you and offers a number of benefits over static HTML files that we'll talk about later. So most of what you do in a Gatsby project is just React. If you're new to React, you can basically think of it as a JavaScript library that lets you break your user interface into components, individual pieces that you then compose together, kind of like building with Lego. A component is basically a little bundle of your HTML markup, your styles, and any JavaScript that applies to one specific little piece of your project. In this video, we're going to ignore styling and we're going to ignore JavaScript logic for now, and we're just going to focus on how you write your HTML markup using this model of React components. So here we can see in the Gatsby default starter, your index page, your home page, is itself a component that combines a number of other smaller components. Some of these are just HTML elements, and some of these are more complex components that contain their own markup. To make this video a little simpler, I want to just start from the beginning. I'm going to clear out some of these things that are here right now. So I'm going to remove these extra imports. I'm going to take out all of this actually, and we'll just say main, and we're just going to say hello for now. And in case this ES6 way of writing a function is confusing to you, I'm going to rewrite this. What you see here is just the exact same as function index page. Okay, and then inside the return, we're going to move our markup. These are the same, but I find this top one a little simpler to look at. And then here we go. So now we have a simpler example that we can build on. So at their simplest, React components are just JavaScript functions that return some HTML markup. You can see in our example here, we have a JavaScript function. You can call it anything you want. We've called it index page, and it's returning what looks like some HTML markup. In this case, it's a main element that says hello, and that gets output on the screen over here. If we inspect this page in our dev tools, we can see the main element is right here. Gatsby automatically includes a couple wrapping divs for you here. And then the markup for our page begins here. And right now, all we're rendering is a single main element that says hello. And you can see that corresponds with what we've written here. So we can keep adding more and more HTML here. If I write a paragraph and say, this is fun, then we're going to see that appear in the browser here. And if we look again at our dev tools, now we see our main has inside of it hello, and then our tag, our p tag, this is fun. So basically any markup that we return from one of these functions, our React components, will be shown on the screen anytime this component is used. As you can see here, it's generally a good idea if you're going to include enough markup inside of a component that you're on more than one line, that you want to wrap your HTML markup in these parentheses. Another thing I want to point out is that when you name a React component, it's normal to start with a capital letter and to use this camel casing where each new word inside the name starts with a capital letter and the other letters are small. So make sure you write your React components with this type of naming to identify them as your custom React components. So even though this markup looks exactly like HTML so far, this is actually being written using a JavaScript syntax called JSX. The fact that it looks nearly identical to HTML makes React much easier to learn, since you can use all of your existing knowledge of HTML as you write it. There are a few minor differences between JSX and HTML. They're mostly there to avoid conflicting with words that already have a special meaning in JavaScript. So for example, in HTML, you're used to writing class equals, fancy styling. This will give you an error in a React project because class is already a name with a special meaning in JavaScript. So to work around that, the convention in React is to change class to class name. You can learn these small differences as you go. You're going to see helpful little errors in your console as you develop. So this is not something you have to study and memorize in the beginning. You'll just pick this up as you go. And if you ever accidentally use a reserved word and need to substitute it for something else, React will just tell you exactly what to do. So to be able to write your HTML markup in this JSX syntax, there are just a couple things you need to know. One is in whatever file you want to write JSX, you need to import React like this. If we don't include this, I'm going to comment this out quickly and save the file. We're going to see an error over here that just tells you React must be in scope when using JSX. So that just simply means if you are writing JSX in a file, you need React to be imported into that file. If React is not included in this file, everything written here will be interpreted as normal JavaScript, which means this opening bracket will be interpreted as a less than operator, and this closing bracket will be interpreted as a greater than operator. It won't be seen as representing HTML. As soon as we include React again and save the file, everything works, and now this is interpreted as an HTML opening tag. One other thing to point out before we move on with JSX is that you need to have one wrapping element around everything else. So right now we have our main element wrapping all of our other content. Let's see what happens if I try to create a sibling here. If I just add another paragraph and say, can I do this in React? So now we have two elements side by side at the same level, and they're not being wrapped by one wrapping element. If I save the file, let's see what happens. Okay, we get another error. And just a quick side note, when you are first learning Gatsby, if you're new to React, you're going to see some errors like this when you save your file, and they're going to look very scary. But just know that everyone is seeing errors like this on a regular basis. It does not mean you're doing something wrong. Just read what the error says, and usually it's just a very simple fix, and it's just a helpful message to tell you exactly what to do. So here we see the description of our error. Adjacent JSX elements must be wrapped in an enclosing tag. So that means that to fix this, we need to wrap all of this inside of a single element. So for example, I can move this paragraph tag inside. Now the main tag is wrapping everything, and it's fine again. If we wanted these things to stay separate, this won't make sense semantically now, so I'm going to change this to a div. And so why don't I wrap this in a new main element that is otherwise empty? Okay, and this is fine as well. The point is that we have something wrapping around all of our other markup. Now, at the moment, the wrapping element that we're using here, this main tag, is actually being sent to the DOM. So let me show you how this looks. Over here, you can see our main div and p tags are being sent to the DOM just like this. We have our main tag here. Inside, we have our div and our paragraph tag. In this case, we're happy with this, but sometimes you're not going to want the wrapping element that you use to actually be sent to the front of the site because that might mess up some of your styling. So what you can do with your JSX, if you don't want to actually have an element go to the DOM, is use this syntax This is called a fragment in React, and it still meets the rule of having a wrapping element for JSX. But if we save this now and go back and look at what has been sent to the DOM, we now see that our main element is completely gone, and we just have the inner elements, the div and the paragraph tag. So fragments are a useful thing to keep in mind if you don't actually want to add an extra wrapping element to the front of your site. Just remember that if you ever have side-by-side elements, something needs to wrap it, whether it is a fragment or an actual tag like a main tag, which I'll put back in for our demo. So as you can see, nesting in JSX works exactly the same way as it does in HTML. Anything that we've put inside of our main tag here ends up inside of the main tag in the DOM. But we don't want to write our entire project inside of one component. That kind of misses the point of having components. We want to break out some of this markup into its own component. So let's see how we split out some of our markup into separate components that we can then compose. What if I were to take this paragraph tag and make it into its own component? So I'm going to go up here and review what we learned about how you create a component. I'm going to create a JavaScript function, and I'll call this one question. So I've used a capital letter to begin, and then I'm going to wrap it in curly braces. I'm going to create a return statement, and then I'm going to extract this paragraph tag and put it here and save, and Prettier is going to rearrange that. So we can see right now that we have lost that paragraph. Can I do this in React is not showing up anywhere. So what's the problem? I wrote a React component. Why am I not seeing it? Well, Gatsby is rendering the index page component, which is right here. The index page component is not currently including the question component. So how do we include it? Well, we just write the name of our component as if it were another HTML element. And then voila, our paragraph tag is back. If we look at this in the DevTools, you can see that the paragraph that is returned from our question component is shown in the place where we have called our question component here. So this is the key to understanding how you write HTML in React. Each component returns some markup, and when you call that component, when you insert it into the return function of a parent component like this line question is going to be replaced with the return value, which is this paragraph tag. In React, this is known as composing components. In this case, index page is the parent component, and question is the child component. So basically, when you add a child component to the return statement of a parent component, the markup from the child component is then included in this position in the parent component. So even though this is so simple, for example purposes, we can continue extracting markup if we wanted. We could say function greeting, and then curly braces, and return nh1 that says our hello. And then here we can add our greeting and remove this hello. So now we have our greeting. And then here we can extract all this and say function. And then we can call this anything just to show you what 2 words is like. Enthusiastic opinion. I hope I spelled all that correctly. Return. And then copy in this markup. We're currently missing it, so we need to include it in the parent, and then ta-da! So we've extracted each separate bit of our markup into a component that has a descriptive name. And what's nice about that is that now when we look at our index page, we don't see a bunch of bare HTML elements. We can see a high-level summary of what content we have in this big page component. In practice, you are probably not going to break out every single HTML element you write into its own individual component. That would just be a lot of work. Where this becomes very useful is where you begin to have more than one HTML element. And if you can imagine this turning into 20 lines of HTML, this is where it can become very helpful to extract all of that markup into its own component and give that component a meaningful name so that when you include that markup, you know at a glance what it's for. So why do we want to write our HTML this way? In this simple example, it looks like we've added a lot of extra lines of code that we wouldn't have needed if we just used plain HTML. So why do we want to do this? Well, one of the main benefits of writing your HTML inside of a component is that components are reusable. So you write the markup in one place, take this component for example, and then we can insert this markup by including this component in as many places as we want. So we could include it again right here, and you can see the markup duplicates. Even though this example is very simple, you can imagine if this were a 20-line component and something we wanted to include on every page, this would suddenly become very useful. On each page, we can just add the component, and then if we want to adjust what it looks like, we can change it in one spot. Let's say we get even more enthusiastic about it, and then everywhere we've included it, the markup and the content will update. Compare this to HTML, where if you wanted to use this component more than once, you would have to copy and paste the markup into every file where you want to reuse it, or in every position in a file where you want to use it. And then if you ever want to update it, if you wanted to make this update, you would have to manually find everywhere that you've included this in your HTML, make the same update, hope that you didn't forget any of them, hope that you didn't make any typos along the way, and basically just have to spend a lot more time anytime you update markup that repeats. In React, you just write that markup and update that markup in one place, and then everywhere you've inserted that component, that markup will be updated automatically. So code reuse is a major benefit of React over plain HTML. If you want to reuse a component on multiple pages, like for example, if we wanted to take this component and also use it on page 2, we need to export this function so that it can be imported by another page. So generally what you want to do in this case is move this component into its own file. So let's do that now. I'm going to go to the components folder. I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to name it the same as the component, enthusiastic opinion. Why did I choose that name? It's so long. Okay, .js, this is a JavaScript file. I'm going to import React from React so that we can use JSX. And then I'm just going to go and extract this. I'm going to cut it and save that file. You can see we've got big problems here now. I'm going to paste it in here and save. And now in order to allow other components, including our pages, to use this component, I'm going to export it. So I'm just going to say export default and then enthusiastic opinion. So what have we just done? We've taken a component, enthusiastic opinion, we've moved it into its own file. I've put that in the components directory. We've imported React from React to make sure the JSX is going to work, and then we've exported the component so that it can be used by another file. And let's show you how to do that now. We currently have an error in our index.js file because we are using a component, enthusiastic opinion, that does not exist in this file. So how do we fix that? Well, it's actually pretty simple. We're going to say import enthusiastic opinion from, and now we write the relative path from where we are, which is inside the pages folder, to the components folder and this file. So 2 dots to go up a level, and then we're going to go into the components folder, and then we're going to choose this enthusiastic opinion component. Once we import it from there, now we can use it, and you can see this is working again. So we can now reuse this component in as many files as we want. All we need to do is make sure we import it at the top of any file where we want to include it. So besides reusing markup, another major benefit of React over traditional HTML files is that you can avoid having to scroll through HTML files that are thousands of lines long. As you've seen, we're able to extract bundles of markup into their own components, and then we're able to extract those components into their own separate files. This lets us keep each individual file very short so that they're easy to understand when we're in them. It's easy to find what we're looking to edit. If you've ever written a website using traditional HTML files, then you have probably had the experience of scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, leaving yourself giant comments to try to help you navigate this long, long file. There's a lot of wasted time and confusion involved in working in a giant file. It's really nice in React that you can break your project into as many separate files as you want to. You don't have to. You can leave as many components in a file as you want. You can do whatever makes the project easier for you to read. So React and Gatsby, they are very powerful tools that can do a lot of other things we haven't talked about yet. But even if all you use React for is to help you break your long HTML files into individual components that you can reuse and place in their own short files, you'll already be experiencing a lot of benefits, and you'll be saving a lot of time that you were previously spending copying and pasting and scrolling through giant blocks of HTML markup. So those are the basics of how you write HTML in a Gatsby project. In the next video, we'll walk through how to add new pages to a Gatsby project. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.